There are many ancient stone structures that are still surrounded by a huge question mark to this day. Of course, there are the gigantic pyramids or the mysterious Stonehenge. But have you ever heard of the Caucasus Dolmens? Well, probably not, but don't worry, that's about to change. Located in the western part of the eponymous mountain range, the Dolmens are probably one of the most confusing testimonies of the past. In fact, experts do not know who created these stone mysteries, nor what purpose they served at all. However, considering their unusual design and intriguing geometric details, many an alternative thinker believes that the mystery of the Dolmens has finally been solved. After all, they are supposed to testify to nothing less than the fact that the inhabitants of the distant past were already in possession of advanced technologies. Some of the terms are almost too much for the average person to grasp. After all, what exactly is a dolmen? Well, if you just shrug your shoulders, we'll be happy to play the dolmen translator for you. By definition, we are dealing here with a structure made of large stone blocks, consisting of at least 3 upright supporting stones and covered by 1 or more stone slabs. So far, so stony. But what purpose did the structures serve, which, incidentally, we find not only in Europe, but also in northern Africa and in parts of Asia? In this regard, experts point out that we are dealing here with millennia-old burial structures. However, if we compare the individual examples with each other, we quickly realize that not all dolmens are the same. The dolmens of the Caucasus differ greatly from their counterparts in the rest of the world. Not only are they much more precisely crafted than other counterparts, but they are also not surrounded by mounds of earth and are closed at the front. And while the unusual dolmens in the west of the mighty mountain range, more precisely in the southern Russia, Georgia, and the Abkhazia region, cover an area of around 12,000 square kilometers, it is their round holes that really catch our eye. Most researchers assume that these so-called soul holes are openings that allow the souls of the dead to enter and leave the site. However, this is only an established but purely theoretical assumption. In fact, there are no archaeological finds that clearly prove that burials were actually carried out in the Caucasus dolmens. What we do have, however, are mortal remains that have come to light in the vicinity of the dolmens. But skeptics point out that we don't know whether these were buried there much later. But at least the ceramic fragments recovered in the area seem to provide us with at least some indication of the age of the stone buildings. Their analysis showed that they were made between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago. And if we now go back to the soul holes, we see that the afterlife portals are by no means always circular, but sometimes square, and that they were often provided with stone plugs to close the gate at the front. But even aside from that, the design of the Caucasus dolmens leaves us open-mouthed. For example, the massive blocks were provided with exact 90-degree angles in places so that they could be used as cornerstones. Elsewhere, the stones were bent to create a circle when connected. Added to this is the fact that the stones are arranged in an amazingly regular pattern, and that their surfaces have been perfectly smoothed. All in all, the Caucasus dolmens represent nothing less than a unique type of prehistoric architecture. Proof of a lost technology? In front of the dolmens, there is usually a courtyard, which, according to experts, was used to hold sacred rituals and ceremonies. And while this courtyard is usually surrounded by large stone walls, sometimes over a meter high, Bronze Age and Iron Age pottery, human remains, bronze tools, and precious gold and silver jewelry have been found in this area. And the fact that the dolmens were apparently very popular in the corresponding epochs is proven by the fact that 3,000 of these megalithic monuments have already been discovered in the western Caucasus, and that the number of new discoveries is constantly growing. However, it is in the nature of things that the construction of the dolmens was, to put it mildly, quite challenging. After all, each of these structures weighs an average of 15 to 30 tons. This makes it all the more confusing that there is not the slightest trace of a quarry in the region. What's more, around the dolmens, scientists did not even find any evidence that the massive stones were somehow dragged to their intended location. And where there are no clear traces of transport, the way is open for theories of a somewhat different kind. Because in fact, the idea that the blocks, each weighing tons, were moved from A to B using only pure muscle power, and then also shaped into such amazing forms, seems, to put it mildly, questionable for alternative historians. Instead, according to the not entirely uncontroversial assumption, the Caucasus dolmens, with their smooth surfaces and circular holes, would testify that their creators were in possession of far more advanced technologies, and that was already the case 4,000 to 6,000 years ago. How you view this unorthodox interpretation is up to you, but the actual construction of the structures seems extraordinary. In most dolmens, the huge stone slabs are connected to each other by specifically crafted grooves, and often so precisely that you couldn't even slide a sheet of paper between the chunks. But how is that even possible? How did the people, thousands of years ago, with the simple means of their time, manage to create such complex stone structures? Well, a team of researchers wanted to find out exactly that in 2007, which is why they decided to reconstruct a copy of the destroyed structures in the Russian city of Gelendzhik. And although the experts were able to use the original ancient parts, they ultimately did not succeed in achieving the same precision as their prehistoric models. Who built the dolmens? But who were these prehistoric role models actually? In other words, which culture was already so advanced at the time that it could create these stone puzzles for posterity? Well, finding the answer to this question is anything but easy. In fact, archaeologist Vladimir Markovin, who has been studying the structures for years, points out that during the assumed period of their creation, people actually still lived in simple mud huts and didn't even know iron or the potter's wheel. And while they spent their days tilling the land with simple hoes, they were still able to erect structures that are extremely impressive by today's standards. However, we must not forget one thing at this point. The corresponding dating to the period between 4,000 and 6,000 years ago is only one of several approaches. Other experts consider it more likely that the artifacts recovered around the dolmens were only placed there much later, and therefore believe that the structures could even be up to 25,000 years old. However, the roots of the Klin Yar community and the Koban culture do not go back 25,000 years. And yet it is these two groups, once based in the Caucasus, that are often associated with the dolmens. However, since this is once again merely an unproven historical assumption, the imagination of alternative theories continues to know no bounds. Researchers with a penchant for the esoteric, who don't have much of an understanding of grave interpretation, believe, for example, that the stone structures mark special power places with strong energy fields. These ominous forces are even said to be able to cure serious illness and unleash our hidden abilities. And even today, pilgrims still travel to the Caucasus dolmens to make contact with unseen powers. Of course, the pre-astronautics community is also throwing its hat into the discussion ring. As is well known, the followers of this parascientific movement are firmly convinced that the inhabitants of ancient times were regularly visited by aliens. Worshipped as wondrous gods by our ancestors, the extraterrestrial guests helped people in return to build structures such as the pyramids, Stonehenge, or even the Caucasus dolmens. But there is another, no less surprising, but rather different explanation. Ask the locals about the history of the dolmens and you are likely to hear the story of the dwarves. These cute creatures are said to have once lived in the area. They were so tiny that they could even ride on hares, and they lived side by side with the giants who kindly built stone dwellings for their diminutive neighbors. But the dwarves had a way all their own of thanking their gigantic house builders. Since they had no desire to return the giants' help, they simply decided to blind them and force mind-altering herbs down their throats. The intoxicated giants then completely lost their minds and began to wipe out first the dwarves and then themselves. All that remained were the dwarf dwellings, which we know today as dolmens, and a fairy tale, if not entirely plausible, explanation for the existence of the mysterious stone structures. but we'll explain to you all the more convincingly how you'll never miss a new video from us again. Feel free to click the thumbs up and subscribe now, and stay up to date with the latest news from us from now on. See you soon!